Hey guys, this is Jennifer Seymour from the Shooter's Mindset. We are here live on our 300th episode of the Shooter's Mindset. I cannot believe it has been 300
Woohoo.
episodes. I don't remember what my first episode was, but I think it was like in the 60s or 70s. So I've done over 200 of these with Anthony. Anthony is not able to be with us tonight. He had a little emergency kind of at the last minute, so he won't be here, but we have our co-host Greg Cannon here with us. How's it going tonight, Greg?
Pretty good. How about y'all?
Going good. I'm at the beach on vacation, so I'm using the beach Wi-Fi. I hope it works the whole time. Haven't been on the beach yet because it's raining and cold. It's in the 60s. It's crazy, but anyway, whatever. Global warming, I guess. Anyway, but for our 300th episode, we wanted to have really cool people on the show. And we were racking our brains, and I was like, oh, Morgan reached out to me about a show, and I was like, I want them to be the 300th show. So for our 300th, we have two geniuses in my mind, Emil Praslick and Bryan Litz, and we welcome both of y'all. I pretty much consider y'all geniuses that I would trust on all things reloading and wind and precision shooting. So it is really, really great to have y'all here. We'll start like one at a time. So Emil, we're glad to have you here. And for those of us that are unfamiliar, I'm familiar, but anybody that's unfamiliar with you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into shooting and how you ended up with Capstone?
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. It's good to see you again. Yeah, so I kind of grew up around the shooting sports. My father was a competitive shooter for the Navy back in the late 50s and early 60s. So he got out of the Navy, and in the 70s, I remember as a little kid going to NRA high power matches with him, carrying his gear, cleaning and prepping brass for a penny a piece of brass and stuff like that. I didn't do a lot of shooting as a junior organized, but we always had some sort of shooting going on, whether it was an air rifle in the basement or, shooting cans or things like that. So I did some time in the Army, got out of the Army and started shooting competitively, joined the National Guard to kind of continue my service, shot competitively for the National Guard, and I got pretty good at it pretty quick with the service rifle, NRA service rifle stuff. The AMU offered me a job, so I came back on active duty, and I spent like the next about 19 years in the Army at the Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning, Georgia. So I was a shooter, then I transitioned into being a coach. And I was the head coach of that team until I retired in 2015. And then in 2016, I was at a rifle match, and I met the then president of Berger Bullets, Eric Stecker, and he chased me down and he asked me if I wanted to come work for Berger. So I took that job, started off doing some sponsorship and marketing stuff, and now I'm in Capstone, which Berger became part of Capstone, which is Capstone Precision Group is all of the Lapua, Vitavori, Berger, and SK Rimfire brands in the United States. And so I'm the military and tactical kind of business development guy for Capstone. And I still get to shoot, and I get to do things like this, and I get to go speak at like the Precision Rifle Expo down in Georgia the last couple of years, and opportunities to work with all kinds of people. And my journeys have actually Bryan Litz and I met years ago when Bryan was a shooter on the U.S. Palma team, which is the World Long Range Championships. When I met Bryan, he was just starting out his long range shooting career in that discipline, and he was already one of the best guys in the world. And Bryan and I became friends, maintained that friendship, and once I got out of the Army and started this job, I got to work with Bryan as a colleague, and then also got to do some stuff with Bryan through Applied Ballistic. So that's how I got to do the King of 2 Mile and all those other things. So that whole journey has kind of brought me to right here with my beer, standing in the Shooter's Mindset show. So I've got a lot more stuff left to do, and the job certainly keeps me busy, and I really do enjoy it.
That's awesome. And Bryan, we'll let you give the same spiel. I know yours will be a little bit different. You're like the genius that helps me hit targets because my little Kestrel, I just like log things in and it tells me what to do. And I love it. When I was first starting learning long range, I would ask everybody, how do you figure out your dope? How do you know this? And they're like, I don't know. I just plug it in this Kestrel. And I was like, what are you talking about? So tell us about yourself, how you got into shooting, and then how you became, applied ballistics and everything that you've done.
Sure. So I had probably a very common experience, exposed to guns from an early age, air rifles and 22s. And I mean, I shot everything, bow and arrow, slingshots, didn't matter. I wanted to hit targets from as far away as I could with whatever would throw a projectile at it. So my first experience with competitive shooting was at the Williamsport range in Pennsylvania. They have a bench rest range there. And, I had been hunting groundhogs in Pennsylvania, trying to shoot them at 600 yards with my 22-250, quite a few summers of that. And then, I got a job. I could afford another rifle, so I could go compete in this 1,000-yard match. And I shot a couple bench rest matches. That was my first competitive shooting that I did. And while at the range one day, I met a group of prone shooters that would come and shoot, laying down on the ground with slings and iron sights, quite different from the bench rest equipment and shooters that I had been shooting with. And it kind of interested me more. And it wasn't so much the guns, but the individuals seemed to be really enjoying it. The guys showed up happy and they left happy. The bench rest shooters would show up kind of anxious and leave. One of them would be happy and everybody else would be, kind of anxiously eager to go tweak their equipment. And it's not that I didn't enjoy that. I wanted to figure it all out too. And we were all on the same journey, but the camaraderie of that other group of guys attracted me over, and they welcomed me in. And a few years later, I went to Camp Perry for the first time I was a senior in high school. Started competing there. I knew that I wanted to have a career somewhere in the field of ballistics, but they don't really offer ballistics degrees at the universities. The closest thing they have is aerospace engineering. So that's what I did. Majored in aerospace engineering at Penn State. And I couldn't really stay seriously involved in shooting for those 4 years in college. I just couldn't afford it, didn't have the time. I'd shoot 1 or 2 local matches and make the annual trip to Camp Perry, but I really wasn't able to give it a serious effort for lack of resources. But then when I graduated, I applied to all the bullet companies for a job, like all of them, and none of them replied. None of them were hiring at the time. And to be fair, a ballistician is not a very common job. I don't know that there's a common protocol for hiring ballisticians. But anyway, I took a job instead at the National Air and Space Intelligence Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where we did work on modeling and simulation for air weapons, and so rockets and missiles and stuff. So that's where I got a lot of very practical experience in modeling. Modeling and simulation of missiles is not that different from a ballistic solver, right? A ballistic solver is much easier. There's no guidance, there's no electronics, it's just a point mass projectile that you propagate its state through space and just figure out where it's going to go so you can make site corrections. And so like being able to make a ballistic solver was something that was common in where I worked. It was actually a very simplified version of what we did. So that's where I kind of got experience and exposure to that. And at this point, I'm able to start competing more. I've got some more time and money. And so I'm getting more serious into shooting, getting more active in the online discussion forums, talking about the problems and the challenges and, just how to shoot better scores, be a better competitor. Sort of made a reputation there and, started doing well in matches. And it was not long after that is when I started Applied Ballistics. So I was working on a book based on my experiences in shooting and what I knew as an engineer. I saw this gap between like shooters go to the range and have all these questions about how bullets fly and how to hit targets. And they talk about it as if it's not known, like it can't possibly be known. We're trying to figure this out. Well, with the engineering background, I know that this stuff is known. Like ballistics it has been a mature science for a long time, since the world wars, when we had, to be hitting targets there. But the problem is that the details were sort of hidden, locked away in old dusty textbooks and engineer and science speak on bookshelves. And, shooters, even if they knew of this information, would have a hard time really digesting it or distilling it from the form that it was in. So I kind of filled the gap there. I just explained to guys what's going on. It's like, you're not asking questions that there's no answer to. There's, this is how it actually works. And so I really enjoyed explaining things and, figuring them out, and then sort of translating what's known to my fellow shooters and learning a lot from them as well. Like there's a lot of academic ideas that just don't fly in the real world. And you learn that from experience. And that, I learned a lot from the older shooters about what's actually practical. But anyhow, all of this, these discussions in forums and articles turned into a book. And that book is kind of what put me on the map in terms of people knowing who I was. And I created a company, Applied Ballistics, basically just to process the sales of the book was all I had envisioned it was going to be. Obviously, it's become a lot more than that. I think it was within...
That book was on the prize table. Like at one of my matches last year at MPA, I think the books were on the prize table and I was going to get them, and the person in front of me got them. I almost tackled him and grabbed the book and ran, but I didn't.
I might be able to hook you up.
I wanted it so bad. I was going to win it, but I didn't.
So not long after, I had this side business going, I had this book, I started getting calls from companies in the shooting industry about going to work for them. And I had developed a friendship with Eric Stecker as well at Burger Bullets. And I had actually done some bullet design work on contract for Burger at this point. That was like, you can kind of see the writing on the walls. I was working in this government job, but at the same time, I'm writing books for shooters. I'm competing in matches. I'm doing contract work for one of the bullet companies. I'm getting job offers from the bullet company. So the writing was on the walls, and it was the direction that I was going. Eventually, I left the government, started work for Burger, and that's where I've been ever since. But in that same time, Applied Ballistics has grown into a much larger deal than I ever thought that it would. I've got other people involved. We've got partners. We have various divisions of some things that just do software, some companies that just do, books. Of course, we have the lab, the mobile lab, Doppler radars. Like it has really grown into something that is incredibly active. Government contracts we're into now. So it's a really big deal. And I have a lot of excellent, smart, hardworking people that work with me. And that's what's brought me here.
That is very impressive. In fact, I think Greg's about to read some shout outs, but one of the shout outs that I happened to see looking through was somebody said that you're way too humble. Greg, why don't you hit some of the other shout outs, like run through them real quick, because I know if we let them go too long, you can't keep up.
Should we go ahead and do the shout out that we have to do, even though I don't think he's here yet?
No, because then he'll bug us when he gets here.
Okay. So Stacy Jones said, "Hey, Jennifer and Greg." George said, "Hi, everyone." Jorge, sorry, not looking. Bill said, "Hey, Jen and Greg." Mike Francis said, "Hello, everyone." Richard Luna said, "The Wind God." Tony said, "Hey." Jen said she's watching from Texas. Robbie said, "Hey, Greg and Jennifer." You got that one already. Jim Henderson said, "What's up, Emil?" Iggy said, "Listening and learning in New Jersey." Monica
I'm sorry.
asked, I was going to let that one
learn from.
Yeah,
I'm from New York. I'm not much better, but it's you can't not say that.
So listen, the first thing you need to learn is come south a little bit. It's a lot nicer here. Monica asked for a link to your book. Where can we buy your books at?
Oh, lots of places have them. You can get them on the Applied Ballistics website, appliedballisticsllc.com. Also Amazon, Midway, Brownell, Sinclair, like any shooting, any place that retails shooting stuff typically carries the books.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you could just type in Bryan Litz books and they all come up on every different website.
There's also e-versions too, that like you can get it for your Kindle and download the electronic version of the books.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of Bryan's humility, so Bryan's a world champion in F class. He's a national champion, went over to Australia, won their national championship in like the prone stuff. There's really every sort of shooting discipline. If you gave him a freaking wrist rocket, he'd eventually end up being a champion. Then he'd get bored and quit and do something else. But, he is a very humble guy, and his list of accomplishments is quite long. Absolutely. And if you listen to the first part of that intro, he's an actual rocket scientist.
He is a rocket scientist. I know.
Yeah, it's not just a joke. So.
Oh, that's funny.
That's right.
Let's see. Kevin from GSL said, hello, everyone. Lou Smith said, hey, Bryan Litz, it was fun shooting with you in the Night Force LR match with you. Jen said, Bryan has shared so much knowledge with me that he has seriously elevated my game. Thank you so much. Timothy said, good stuff, you guys. Hope to see you at another match. Johnny Appleseed said he's going to get them books soon. John said, very good guest tonight. Monica, you're welcome. Travis Wallace said, listening from San Antonio. Been a while since I've talked to Emil or Bryan. Hope everything is going good.
All right. Well, I think, as you can tell from the comments, everybody would love to like open your skull and just crawl into your brain. Actually, both of you, to talk about different things, all shooting. But BC is one of the things. Ballistic coefficient is one of the things that I think is confusing to a lot of people, and a lot of people don't understand it and have a lot of questions. So that's really what we're here to talk about. So y'all just launched the No BS BC campaign. So tell us a little bit about what that's about. Then we've got a couple of other little questions off of that.
Well, I'll start off, and then I'll let Bryan do all the heavy lifting. The No BS BC campaign, within Burger Bullets, when I first got hired, I got hired by Burger. And the first thing I noticed when I started working for Burger was that everybody in that company they were very honest about the level of performance that they expected. The quality assurance and QC programs were just unbelievable. The tolerances they were holding these bullet jackets to, it was nuts. And then to complement that, so that was basically the ethos was, we're not going to put something out there to the public that we don't think is not the very best that we can put out there. And so, we started looking at like the BC number that's on the box. The BC number that's on a box of Burger bullets for far back as I can remember has always been an honest ballistic coefficient number, a number that you can actually use in your solver. Take the number on the box, put it in the solver. That number right there, that's a real no shit number. That's not a number inflated for marketing. That's not a number calculated at a very high velocity to make the number appear to be higher than it might be in reality when you're shooting across long distances. It's an honest number. So what we really want to do, especially with all of our new bullet products, our long-range hybrid targets, we started testing these bullets and we found that the variation in the BCs was extremely low, like less than 1%. And I'll let Bryan explain what that means. But we wanted to create a campaign to just try to educate shooters, educate everybody about the science of give people access to Bryan's expertise in this. So what is a BC? Why is it important? And what are the things that truly matter in terms of long range shooting or shooting in general? So the consistency of BC is probably more important than the actual BC number. The the bullet's ability to penetrate the air and form factor and all that stuff is probably less important to a shooter trying to achieve hits on a target than if every single bullet is the same and they're all predictable. So we wanted to highlight all those things. So all these things that, like say Bryan said earlier, you know, he learned from older shooters kind of what was important and what was like sort of academic. This is kind of the same type of thing. We want to let people know like what's important. Help kind of cut the curve. Everyone's trying to flatten the curve with the COVID. We want to flatten the curve with all this BC knowledge and let people understand the things that are important quickly to help, you know, so you don't have to look around for 20 different sources and waste a year of your life trying to learn what's truly important. So distill all these sort of topics down into some articles and some videos and some things like that to help educate people and open up our process to where we're completely transparent in how we do our testing and what our bullets look like, and give the public access to that. So that's kind of the overall philosophy of this campaign. Of course, we want to sell bullets. I mean, we're a company. We got to sell stuff, right? So we want to try to highlight the ways in our bullets are superior to other bullets, especially with regard to the consistency of our projectiles. So it kind of made sense both ways. So that's kind of the orientation of this No BS BC campaign.
That's awesome. Bryan, did you want to add?
Yeah, so I'll just launch right into it if you're all ready. So there's the questions that you have. I'll start out though by giving sort of a narrative about what BC is. I mean, there's obviously an equation for it, but I don't think that means much to your average shooter. I think guys want to understand fundamentally, what is this? What idea can I sink my teeth into that I will say I understand what a BC is now? And the best way that I can explain it is it's a number that tells you how effective a bullet is at penetrating the air, okay, retaining its velocity and penetrating through the air. Like if you throw a dandelion seed, okay, that's not good at penetrating. It just basically goes with the wind. A ping pong ball, same thing. But if you have a ball bearing, that's something that retains its velocity better when you throw it. So it would have a higher BC. Now, I won't like write down the formula or anything, but the ballistic coefficient is its sectional density divided by a form factor. Now, what sectional density is, that's a metric that is often used for terminal ballistics to describe a bullet's potential to penetrate, into game animals or some kind of medium. And sectional density, what makes that up is the bullet's weight and its diameter. So the heavier the bullet is and the smaller its diameter, the better it will be at penetrating something. Like if you can maximize that ratio, you have a projectile that's very good at penetration on impact. Well, because ballistic coefficient it describes how well the bullet penetrates the air, all you need to do is take that measure of penetration and put a modifier on it that makes it relevant for aerodynamics. And that's what the form factor does. The form factor is something that describes the drag, the aerodynamic drag of a bullet in relation to a standard. So, we talked about sectional density. All that makes that up is a bullet's mass and its diameter. Well, that's all you really need to know if you're looking at penetration on impact. But if you're looking at penetration through the air, well, now the shape matters too. It matters if the nose is blunt or sharp. It matters if it's a flat base or a boat tail. So that's where the form factor comes in. You can have two bullets with the same form factor, with the same sectional density, but if one of them is lower drag, it'll have a better form factor and a higher BC. And it's really, that's the only part about it that's mysterious. Like you could calculate the BC of any bullet if you know its caliber, which you do of any bullet that you're interested in, its weight, that gets you sectional density, and that's most of the way there. All you need to know about a bullet after you have its mass and its diameter is how its drag relates to a standard, and then you can define the BC of a bullet. People ask me all the time, in conversation, like, what's the BC of this bullet or that bullet? And I don't have any of that memorized. There may be, I can count on one hand the number of bullets that I could know the BC from memory. Because they're all different calibers and weights, right? But what I can remember very well, I can guess within most of the time 1%, sometimes 2%, what the form factor is of a bullet, because that scales. Like a 6mm 105 hybrid has essentially the same form factor as a 300 grain 338 hybrid, because they're the same shape. Right now, the BCs are vastly different because they're different weights and calibers, but we know what those are. And so you throw those into the calculation for BC, you use the same form factor on both of them, and I can arrive at a BC for any bullet that I know its mass, caliber, and basically what it looks like. And that's not that hard to do. You know, that's in the books that I published, I have like profile shapes of bullets along with their BCs and form factors. And if you spent 5 minutes kind of like looking at that, trying to get an idea of what shape correlates to what form factors, you can get pretty good at estimating within a few percent what a form factor is for any given shape. And as closely as you can guess the form factor, that's how closely you can know the BC of the bullet, because the weight and diameter are the easy part. So that's really all BC is in concept. It's how well the bullet penetrates the air and retains its velocity. Now, all the other measures of ballistic performance, you know, drop, wind drift, kinetic energy, all the stuff that we care about for hitting targets derives from a bullet's retained velocity. Okay, if a bullet didn't lose any velocity, okay, there's two ways to say how that could theoretically be possible. One is if you're shooting through no atmosphere, right, through a vacuum, there's no aerodynamic drag to slow it down. The other way to look at it is if it had an infinitely high BC, which you could never have because you can't have, you know, I guess you could say if the thing had thrust equal to drag so that it retained, like an airplane, right, has thrust equal to drag to maintain speed. Well, you don't have any wind deflection in that case because there's no velocity loss. So all of these measures of ballistic performance are related to how well the bullet retains velocity, and that's described by the ballistic coefficient. So that's fundamentally what we're dealing with, and it's a very important number and convenient number because you can wrap up the whole. There's actually an entire description of a bullet's drag at every discrete velocity along the Mach spectrum. You know, we can publish that performance in tables of, you know, vast numbers, but that's not convenient to put on a box, and you can't really look at that and know, like, compare it to another bullet. So a ballistic coefficient is a convenient number because it's comparing a bullet to a standard that has a table that's defined for it. Like when you use a ballistic coefficient in a software program, it has that entire curve built in there. And whenever you put the BC in, what it's doing is relating the bullet's drag to that standard curve. That's why you only need one number and you get a whole curve worth of information. You get the entire performance of that bullet described over its full range of flight speeds with just one number, because it's a multiplier, it's a factor. So that's why we use them, because they're convenient to make comparisons with. And like Emil said, we go to great lengths to make sure that they're accurate. You know, when I first was learning about how ballistic calculations worked, you know, and I was looking around, BCs at that time were very much used as a marketing tool. Like, you know, first of all, they were referenced to G1, the G1 standard, which is not a representative shape for the bullets that we shoot. So it could be vastly different. The consequence of that is your BC could be vastly different at high speeds versus low speeds. And so you can't really put one number on it because the curve isn't representative for your bullet. So that's one problem with it. And another problem is nobody at that time really had a good way of verifying or checking if those numbers were accurate or not. And so that was, you know, the big project in my first book was to have a consistent way of measuring all the BCs and publishing their numbers from a third party so that it wasn't tied to any specific bullet company. So there was no bias there. And we actually had accurate numbers that we could use. Now, it turned out that some of the bullet companies were advertising numbers that were, you know, very close to what I measured. Some of them were very different from what I measured. And they were all all of the error was in the high direction. There was no bullet company advertising BCs that were lower than actually measured. So it was just a question of how inflated they were. And so, I came out and published all these numbers, and that's something that we have continued to build on and maintain, and is available as a digital library now that you can access through the Applied Ballistics apps, where you build your gun, you select your bullet, you're getting a number that's a measured number nowadays with Doppler radar. And so, when I was hired at Berger, the first thing I did was come on and looked at all the BCs that were assessed for all the bullets. And I was like, they were estimated by computer software. And it was an honest effort to get the numbers right. But in some cases, they were a couple percent high. And so I came in across the board and lowered all of Berger's advertised PCs is week one. And, thankfully they have the culture there that Emil described of, it's more important to get it right than to, exaggerate a claim. Exaggerating a BC number that you print on a box might help you sell a box of bullets. But if the shooter is trying to hit targets with that and using that number and finds that it's not accurate, well, you've got two problems now. One, you're not hitting targets because your ballistic solutions aren't accurate. And two, you realize that the performance of that bullet isn't what you thought in comparison to others. You might have thought you were buying the highest BC bullet, but if it doesn't hit the target with using that number, in a solver, well, then you don't know what your performance is, but it's lower, so that's something that we put a lot of focus on at Berger, especially is getting the accurate numbers on those boxes that you can actually use.
Bryan, why do we still see G1 and on some bullet in some bullet advertising or bullet makers to use a G1 number if it doesn't match the performance or the drag curve of bullets?
I think it's just a paradigm. Paradigms take time to change, and the shape of the G1 projectile is actually like a black powder cartridge rifle bullet. It's flat base, it's short nose, and its drag is not representative at all of the bullets that we shoot. But there's a lot of guys that are, there's a lot of shooters who are very traditional, and they learned something once when they were a kid learning to reload, and they put the effort into studying and learning what a BC was, and now they've got all these numbers in their head as a frame of reference to the G1 standard. And now 40 years later we roll out a new number, and people who are just getting into it they don't recognize a change. It's just how it is. But I think you have a lot of inertia in the form of, I guess, traditional knowledge baked into the culture that you can't just take that number away. They'll lose their reference for things. So we continue to put out G1 BCs for that reason. We do the best we can to average them over long range so that, it may not be accurate at high speed, it may not be accurate at low speed, but it's a good average for the middle. But it really, I would like to see them phased out entirely, except for bullets that they actually are representative for.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about BC numbers too, I mean, it's something that, I'm very sensitized to now that I'm in the industry, and I'm across all the different social media stuff, and I see people making decisions about which bullet they're going to buy based on the number that's they either find on the manufacturer's website or they see in the store or whatever. And having the highest BC bullet may not necessarily be your best answer. Number one, the purpose of shooting is to hit your target, right? So, number one, so if a bullet has a really high BC, but it has low precision, that means that you're probably not going to hit your target. And also, if it has a high BC, but that BC is not consistent, that's also a problem. You would be better off with a bullet with a lower BC, but is more consistent. And that's, I think, once it really opened my eyes once Bryan started sharing his Doppler radar data with us, so part of our bullet process is, Bryan helps design the bullet. We have another engineer in Mesa, Arizona, Garrett Stoddard, who is sharp as a tack and super smart kid. And so Garrett and Bryan are working together to help design a bullet, and before any bullet goes into production, it goes up to Bryan to be shot over Doppler radar. So first at short range and then at long range to kind of look at this variation. And there are times where, you know, you look at a bullet and you look at that performance and you see the actual error. You can see the error plotted on a line where from shot to shot, those bullets are not the same. Sometimes they vary by 3%, which doesn't really sound like a lot, but Bryan, how would you quantify errors in percent versus like errors in velocity if somebody was like hand loading? Because I know I just ordered an auto trickler today. I almost crapped a fully grown cat when the guy told me how much everything was going to be. Once I added all my upgrades, like a fully grown Siamese cat, I almost pooped it straight out. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I need one. So I'm going to have one of these things, right? I can measure to a freaking kernel, right? And I'm going to try to get SDs down to like 3 and 4 feet per second. But if my bullet standard deviation of ballistic coefficient is high, then all that work is almost for nothing.
Yeah, so people are very tuned in to the idea of minimizing muzzle velocity, standard deviation, so that your vertical dispersion is minimized at long range. So that's, a lot of people are familiar with that. And to put it in perspective, if I can remember this right, I think that if you're, and this will be a little different for every cartridge, but as a rule of thumb, it's like a standard deviation of 10 feet per second in your muzzle velocity corresponds to about 10 inches of vertical dispersion at 1,000 yards. Okay, that's just rough, even numbers that we can all kind of relate to. But nobody knows what the variation in their BC is shot to shot, and that has the same kind of effect on vertical dispersion. I mean, it's easy to imagine if you shoot one bullet with a higher BC and then another one at the same speed with a lower BC, the lower BC hits lower, and you have, in reality, the BC of your bullets, it's not exactly the same every shot. You know, it's, I think I used to assume that because we just had no way to measure it. And, you know, you just took for granted that they.
Why do they change though, Bryan?
There's different reasons. Depending on the construction of the bullet, if the geometry is not consistent, in particular, the tip of the bullet. So, you know, swage bullets are made in a manufacturing process that is, you know, we do our best, everybody does their best, but you're dealing with imperfections in geometry on these things. And the goal is to manufacture something with imperfections that are too small to matter, right? As long as they're too small to matter, then it's okay. But the fact is that there are imperfections and there's inconsistencies. And where you see that on a typical swage bullet is in how completely the nose forms, okay? If you can imagine a bullet being swaged up into a die, if it doesn't get pushed all the way up in, or if the lube is a little bit different on that jacket, it may have the effect of not fully forming the nose, in which case you have a shorter nose with a wider opening on the tip. Well, that'll be a higher drag bullet, a lower BC bullet. It can be exactly the same weight, same diameter, but it can be malformed in a way that, say malformed, just a little bit different. And you know, that's one way that a bullet can be inconsistent from shot to shot. Another one is if you're dealing with a stability issue, in particular, so at transonic. So you can have different ways that stability introduces inconsistency. So if your twist rate isn't fast enough to give you a gyroscopic stability factor of 1.5 or higher at the muzzle, okay, if your SG is less than 1.5, then you're going to see two things. One, you're going to see a lowering of the average BC that you're shooting your bullets with due to lack of stability right out of the muzzle. And also the BC will start to, you know, have more variability in it. It's just not a properly stabilized bullet. You could also have a problem if you do have a fast enough twist to stabilize the bullet out of the muzzle. Let's say your SG is 1.8 or 2. So the bullet comes out with the maximum BC that it can fly with, and it's consistent and solid all the way to transonic. Now, some bullets start to have variations at transonic that they don't have at any other speed. And so stability can be a reason why you see variations in shot-to-shot BC. So there's a couple different reasons. And when you get into solid bullets, there's additional reasons why you could have that problem. But the big sort of reason this is all relevant, especially now, is Well, one, we're able to measure it. Things can't be relevant, I guess, till you can measure them and put a number on them and see what's going on. And that's what the Doppler radar lets us do, is see not only what the variation in BC is on a particular design of bullet, but where that occurs, if that's occurring in supersonic or transonic or all the way, basically characterize that variability. But also another reason that it's important, and this is like sort of understanding the state of the art and where we are in precision projectile development in 2020, is so up until this point, like you look at the development of bullets, we're making longer, heavier bullets for each caliber than have ever been made before, with conventional manufacturing in small arms. And I say we, that's the entire industry. Every bullet maker is getting into heavier bullets, longer bullets. And the reasons are obvious, right? The higher performance comes from that. But you have some challenges too. The reason that it wasn't done like that right off the bat, I think, is because, the faster twist rates that you need to stabilize long, heavy bullets, and that exacerbates dispersion through things like imbalance and misalignment. And if you go back to like the 30s and 50s, when a lot of this stuff was getting, standardized in the first place, the manufacturing techniques were, not good enough to spin a 110 grain 6mm bullet out of an 8 twist and hold any kind of group. The chambers weren't as good, barrels weren't as good, bullet jackets weren't as good. And so the whole thing would have just been a mess to try to make long, heavy bullets stable out of fast twist with poor quality components. And so we standardized on what we did, 10 twist 6 mils with, 70 grain class bullets, all that kind of stuff. Well, as manufacturing has gotten better for barrels, we can make more concentric jackets. We can now spin bullets faster and not suffer those precision losses. So we're doing it. But you do run into other problems. There's still limitations and constraints on our state of the art even now. And one of them has to do with the consistency with which you can draw a jacket long and make a long, heavy bullet. So we're, 6 mil, 105, 110, why not 115 or 120? What is it that limits that upper bound? And part of it is how well you can manufacture a bullet that's that long. Like Emil was saying, we work a lot on prototyping bullets and testing them and seeing like how much we can get away with. And if we're going to make a bullet that exceeds what is known to work in that application, we're not going to do that without thoroughly testing it. And a lot of times what we find is when we try to push that envelope, it doesn't always work. Sometimes if you try to make a bullet that's too long and too heavy, you have one of these stability or forming issues that prevent you from going that far. And so we kind of rein it in and we find out like, what is the highest BC bullet that we can make that retains its reliable, consistent number? It's the same performance, because you don't want to trip over that cliff. And there's a lot of examples from, I won't name specific other brands, but there's a lot of examples of bullet companies reaching too far, making bullets that are longer and heavier than they ever have before. And these things might shoot good groups at 100 yards, but when you see them fly, you see the radar tracks at long range, they're just incredibly wildly inconsistent. And shooters won't realize that until they're at long range, seeing their groups open up vertically and, not understanding why. Because everything seems to be in order there. You could have very good muzzle velocity SD, shoot good groups at 100 yards, and shoot good with other bullets. So like, it's not immediately obvious what this problem is with that class of bullets. But in many cases, and there's getting to be more and more cases of this as more, bullet companies try to be competitive, make even longer, even heavier bullets, while not understanding the problem that is causing to this shot-to-shot BC variation. And so, that's kind of why we're on this campaign, is to point out like, hey, it's not just about a number. The BC is a helpful number. It characterizes performance, and you can use them to compare bullets to each other. But that number also has a variation related to it. Just like your average muzzle velocity has a standard deviation. Well, your average BC, it has a standard deviation as well. And if it's too high, then you're not going to hit targets at long range. Your groups are going to be too tall. So to kind of put that in perspective, remember we said earlier, on muzzle velocity, a standard deviation of 10 feet per second is about 10 inches of vertical dispersion at 1,000 yards. Well, with BCs, if you have a standard deviation, and this is again going to be approximate, of about a standard deviation of 1%, that's about 5 inches of vertical dispersion. Now, assuming your muzzle velocity is the same every shot, now we'll hold that constant. And just the shot-to-shot BC variation, if it's 1% of the BC, your group is going to be about 5 inches tall at 1,000 yards. And then it get worse from there. We try to, all of the bullets that we test, like our acceptance criteria is 1% or less. On some of the long-range hybrid target bullets that are pointed, that MEPLO reduction technology has that number down to like 1/3% or 0.5%. It's truly the lowest SDs on BC that I've seen on any bullets that we've ever tested. But on the other end, you get into it's not uncommon to see that number go to 5%, 6 or 7% on some bullets that are truly just designed to too long. They went over the edge of the cliff. They're too long and too heavy for caliber. And if we prototype a bullet that performs like that, we will rein that back in and, finalize it at a configuration that is consistent. It's literally the highest it can be while remaining consistent.
And that's been my observation as well. In F class, which is kind of like where guys really get completely anal with, these guys are measuring bullets for overall length to try to uniform BC and things like that. And that's where you see it. You see it vertical on the target. It's directly translated to vertical on the target. And then with the wind, that's the same thing. Look, you're trying to read wind, and if the BC is changing from every shot, not only are you losing precision with the rifle, but you're having different wind effects as well. So, having a consistent BC helps you shoot the smallest group possible. My old man used to say, a good hold is worth half a minute of wind. So you're trying to read the wind to within a half minute, but if the guy is pointing the rifle in the middle of the target every single shot, he doesn't have to worry about the wind as much as somebody with a large group size. So the more consistent BC you have, you're just helping yourself. So if you have a really, really consistent BC and you have precision, that means that all those bullets are hitting more or less in the same place. That cuts down on your wind error. That cuts down on, and that ups your hit percentage. So I know you guys had some, I know that Morgan Joy Twinter, who's our sponsorship and social media diva, I know she set you guys up with some giveaways for this.
Yes, we love Morgan.
Yes, Morgan makes our job so easy. Thanks, Morgan, if you're watching, by the way. So before we hit the new giveaway that we're going to announce, the post is already up, but everybody's watching us, not looking at that. We also have another giveaway that Morgan set up from last week with. Emil, will you say the L word for me, because you say it better than me?
Lapua.
So I've been corrected every time I go to Finland. One of these dudes, that eats reindeer jerky all day long, they get mad at me, but I believe it's Lapua. So it's I always grew up saying Lapua, like everybody else, where we have moon rocks, but it's actually Lapua.
Last week I had to run the show with Luke, and I was like, beforehand, I'm like, tell me how to say it again. Tell me how to say it again. I practiced it.
It was so funny. My girlfriend was, I said it right one time, telling my girlfriend about the show, and she's like, what's that? And I'm like, oh, that's Lapua that I say all the time. She's like, oh, Lapua, the bougie ammo. I'm like, yeah, that's it.
So it's a town in Finland, actually. That's where the factory is. So,
I asked where it came from on the show. I was like, where did that name come from? He told us.
The company was founded in 1923 as a arms manufacturer for the Finnish army. And they actually supplied all the munitions for the Winter War when they fought the Soviets and kicked the crap out of them. So the company's been around. Their 100th anniversary is actually coming up here in a few years. But yeah, so it's the name of the town. So it's Lapua.
Awesome. And so what we have from Lapua is we have 3 hat and t-shirt combos along with 1 free testing at either one of their locations. So if you have a 22, you can send it off to them and they'll give you that awesome service of testing, finding the right batch of ammo. And unfortunately, Jennifer was really mean to me last week and told me that I wasn't allowed to enter this.
That's poor form.
I
Yeah,
know.
the two locations are Mesa, Arizona, and Marengo, Ohio. It's at the Cardinal Shooting Center. Jim Henderson, who said hi to me earlier, an old AMU buddy, Jim is one of the guys that runs the Cardinal Shooting Center in Ohio. And that's where it's a 100-meter test tunnel. We take your 22 rifle, put it in the test tunnel, and then match it to a lot of Lapua rimfire ammo.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead.
So who won? Who won?
I got to find, where's the share screen button? We're going to share screen 2 here. So what we have here, this is everybody that entered in the competition. We are going to go to, oh, that's over here, wrong thing. Not our notes. Random number generator. So we had 43 entries. So our first drawing is going to be for one of the hat and t-shirt combos. And that is number 42. So we'll go down here, not that far. That's going to be Jeffrey Kims. And we're going to go back over here and we're going to do another random number generator. This is for another shirt, by the way, or a hat and shirt is number 30. Oop, that's not where we're trying to go. Number 30 is John Wisebush. And we're going to do another random number for another hat and shirt combo. Number 33, which is Mike. His last name starts with an M.
Looks like Margolis.
Margolis. Our last winner for that free testing service so that they could find the best Lapua ammo that shoots for them is number 37. Voss, my
Voss
buddy.
won.
That is awesome. That is my buddy there, and he has a brand new rifle that is on his way to him right now. I think he's got it yet. Voss, you better be watching or I'm gonna be mad at you. But congratulations. So what our giveaway for this week is we have a really awesome prize package. We have 3 certificates good for 2 boxes of burger bullets. So basically gold in a box. And 2 certificates for a burger hat and shirt combo. How this is going to work is we want to get pictures of your burgers on your bench. So there's a post that is live on the Shooter's Mindset page right now, and you have to snap a picture of your burgers on your bench. Please make sure it's a good picture. We want aesthetically pleasing photos here. We don't need no garbage. If you need to get your wife to take the picture, just ask her. Tell her to win you free gun stuff so you can spend more money on her.
Or husband.
Husband, yes, that one.
Thank you, Emil.
You're welcome. I'm a modern man.
That's right.
Anyway, do that. Tag 2 friends and make sure that you like Burger Bullets and the Shooter's Mindset on Facebook, and we'll do another drawing pretty much the same style next Tuesday, sometime in between 9 and 10.
Get some free stuff.
Say I could.
I kind of want to win those burgers, man. I've spent a pretty penny on some burger bullets the last 2 years. I like them though. I like the burgers.
I just want to say I really appreciate this opportunity. For us, especially for Bryan to come on and be able to share his knowledge. I would recommend getting his books. Get all those books. And it really will kind of expand your knowledge and let you kind of look at topics like this. If you're trying to decide which bullet to buy, make an educated decision on it. And we've got a lot of good things coming up at Burger. If people want to access to all those articles that Bryan has written about the No BS BC campaign, you can either find them through our blog, on Burger Bullet's website. There's a no BSBC tab there, or just type in nobsbc.com, and that'll take you to that website and look at all that content. There's lots of great content on there, and these are articles that Bryan wrote specifically to try to explain some of these concepts. It's hard to talk about it all in 40, 45 minutes, which is why, like, Bryan does seminars where he talks for 2 days straight and he still doesn't get to cover everything he wants to cover. So check out the nobsbc.com, and we've got a lot of new bullets and products coming. Just keep an eye out for those press releases. We have all those new long range hybrid target bullets with the smaller meat plots, the meat plot reduction technology. So we're going to be getting around to putting some of those bullets in factory ammunition. So look for those in the future as well. And anything that I can do for you guys, I'm on Facebook. Shoot me a message, and I'm happy to. I'm an open book. I'm happy to tell you anything that I know. And I appreciate this opportunity to come on and talk to you guys. Thank you so much, Greg.
He will always help too. I've always asked questions, and he always answers and gives me lots of knowledge. It's very helpful. All right, we have some live questions, and then I have one. So go ahead, Greg, with some live.
All right, we have a ton of live. If I don't get you, I am super sorry, but there are a bunch of you out there. John said when we were talking about finding the G7 from stuff that only has a published G1, that he never would have found it for a 107 Sierra Match King unless he had Bryan's information. Katie Godfrey said you can learn so much in a super short time from these guys. The good news for you guys is
we love Katie.
We all love Katie.
Yeah.
The good news is this is going to be recorded. We're going to have it posted up on basically all of the podcast websites. Probably tomorrow around the time that Greg gets home from work, whenever that happens to be, we're going to have it uploaded on YouTube so you can rewatch it. So it's not like when I took Emil's wind class at Precision Rifle Expo, how I retained maybe 10% of everything, and then I had to go back the next year, got another 10%, so I got at least 8 more years of his wind class until I get all of the knowledge that he has. You guys could re-listen to this episode as many times as you want. Let's see. There's another good one. Lindsay wants to know, she said, hey all, quick question for Bryan and Emil. I know that you've stated that the BC for Burger bullets is based off of a velocity of 3015 feet per second. So is it safe to assume that any speed below 3015 would yield a lower BC?
Well, I mean, go ahead, Bryan. Go ahead.
So there might have been something lost in translation there. The BC that we print on the box and put on the website is the average BC from 3,000 feet per second down to 1,500 feet per second. Is that what you were reading?
Yeah, that would make sense. I know you guys have said that before. And she also said, correct me if she was wrong at her assumption of 3015. So.
And
yeah,
the reason,
so
and those numbers, why do we pick those numbers, Bryan? Do they translate to range?
No, because they're just a representative. That's like the heart of the envelope for long range bullet flight, right? Your muzzle velocity might be a little higher or lower than 3,000, and your velocity at the target might be a little more or less than 1,500. But in order to have a BC that is it's an apples to apples consistent way of looking at the number, you have to pick a common velocity range. You just have to pick one. And who knows, maybe it should be 2,800 down to 1,300. Maybe it's arbitrary, but we picked a range that was representative, and it's the same velocity range that we use for all bullets. So that explains that. And if your bullet is flying outside of that range by only a little bit, then your ballistic trajectory is going to be predicted quite accurate. If you're outside of that for most, like if you take a bullet and fire it at subsonic speed, then that supersonic G7 or G1 is going to not represent that bullet's flight well at all, because it's not even in the range at all. But if you're flying, if you're mostly covered by that 3,000 to 1,500 foot per second range, then you're going to be quite accurate. Now, there's ways to sort of transcend these limitations of BC, and that's where we get into custom drag modeling that we can do with the Doppler radar. When we track a bullet, we can measure its actual drag, and rather than relating that to a standard drag curve and providing a BC, or I should say in addition to that, we also create a drag model that is baked into the software when you select the bullet from the library, and it's not referencing a BC. It doesn't have any of these velocity sensitivity issues where you have to worry about these bands or breaking it up into different velocity segments, because it's modeling the actual drag that we directly measured. So that's a whole longer conversation there about getting into more drag modeling. But to basically answer that question, yeah, if you're mostly within that velocity range, you're going to get accurate trajectory predictions.
So I have a question that kind of bounces off of that. So I hear people all the time, they're like, oh, I'm going to true my BC, and they like adjust their BC and their Kestrel. I've never had that problem because you're pretty much a genius. And every time I put in the BC that's for the bullet, I go to the range, and amazingly, I put it in this little Kestrel and it spits out a number, and I aim at the target and it hits at every distance. And the only time I don't is when I screw up. So I've never had to do that. But is that something that like needs to be done? Like, if you are having issues with your dope being off, are you supposed to true your BC and alter it? And if so, how do you do that? And why would you need to?
No, I would really advise against that. So there's actually a lot of thought that's gone into truing or ballistic calibration and the sequence that it's done. So from the muzzle out to transonic range, you want to true the muzzle velocity and not the BC. If you are able to shoot a calibration target further, like into subsonic or deeper into trans, then you can do that, and then you can calibrate the DSF or the drop scale factor. But the numbers that you're working with out of that library are live fired Doppler measured like numbers. You're not gonna infer a better number than that by watching your bullet hit the dirt at 1,000 yards. Like that's, you can't resolve a better number than what we're putting in there. Now, having said that, it is possible that, there are variations in BC for, like the average. There's small variations from lot to lot. There's variations as a barrel wears out, different rifling configurations. All these things can have tiny effects, but I'm talking like it'll move your average maybe 1% either way. And again, a shooter is typically not going to be capable of resolving how much different the BC is for his particular gun. Now, to get that last little bit of accuracy on your BC, like if you want to know the BC of your bullets out of your gun with your loads and your barrel, we travel the Applied Ballistics mobile laboratory with the radar to different venues. Now, we can't get to everybody, and but when we do, we come out and make that available. That's really the only way to, I would say, true your BC, is to have a live fire instrumented measurement of it, either with a radar or an acoustic system like an AILR 88 or an AILR 89 system. So I wouldn't recommend truing your BC based on your observed drop. If you're truing a muzzle velocity that's different from what your chronograph said, I think that's the conundrum that guys get into that makes them want to true the BC. 9 times out of 10, if that happens, there's something else is wrong. There's some other error in inputs. Like you said, you just put in the numbers in it and it works. That's the common experience. That's what happens for most people. But if you put in the numbers and something's off, it's because of something else in your inputs. You're not putting in the right muzzle velocity. Maybe you don't understand barometric versus station pressure. Maybe your sight height is in centimeters and not inches. Like every way that those inputs can be messed up have been messed up, and you might be doing that if you think the BC is off. So that's what I'd say about that.
And that's been my experience too, like from the user end. When I do some work with guys, teaching them some long range shooting on the military side, and if it doesn't line up, if it's drastically wrong, it's usually an error in an input somewhere. And, it might be something as simple as the guy left his environment live and he stuck the Kestrel in his pocket, or he's got the Kestrel lying on the ground where it's heating up. and the Kestrel thinks it's 30 degrees hotter than it truly is. So it's always Olympus. I would go through all those things, and at the very end, if that number doesn't say what if you're not hitting the target with the muzzle, and you have a lab radar, and I got 3 lab radars, man, there's no way my muzzle velocity is wrong. It still might be something that you're not seeing. It might be a range uncertainty. It might be some other aspect that you can't see. True the muzzle velocity, and that kind of retains that drag curve, and you're really not getting stuff out of kilter. Even if you have to true the muzzle velocity by 20, 30 feet per second, that, in my experience as a user, not a super smart guy, but as a user, and that result will usually get my trajectory, my solution to line up to where the bullets are hitting for where I need to do them. But once you get into that and you start changing around BC stuff, man, you're asking for a lightning bolt from Zeus to come down.
It messes with your wind too. Like if you have to fudge your BC to get your drop to line up, well, it's and the problem isn't really BC. The problem there is that, yeah, you might have trued your drop, but now all of your wind solutions aren't going to be accurate because the BC is used for the wind also.
That makes sense.
You know, one of the things I would say to the folks that are, I understand, man, I've used 2 and 3 chronographs at once, and when they all agree, it's very compelling, but here's where it can still be wrong. So sometimes, and we can see this on a Doppler radar track, sometimes when a bullet is launched out of a gun, it has a launch dynamic. And people talk about bullets going to sleep. That's what that's all about, is it can come out with some initial disturbance, and it goes through a series of precession cycles before it dampens out and flies straight. And so while that's happening, the bullet is bleeding off more velocity than it normally would, right? Effectively, it's got a drastically depressed BC for that first 30 or 50 yards, whatever it is. Now, the chronographs may be measuring your actual velocity at the muzzle. Let's say your magnetospeed is 100% accurate. Well, if that bullet loses more velocity in the first 50 yards than it should have based on its actual BC. In other words, if you have a launch dynamic and you're bleeding off velocity, then on a long range trajectory, that's effectively the same as having a lower muzzle velocity. You know what I mean? So like, let's say that all this launch dynamic stuff bled off 10 feet per second in the first 50 yards, 10 feet per second more than it would have if it was flying straight. Well, that's effectively the same as having a 10 foot per second lower muzzle velocity for that long range trajectory. So even if your instrumentation is accurate, there's still an argument for truing the solver to get your muzzle velocity and having that be a better answer. There are cases where that is a better way to do it than using even an accurate chronograph. Does that make sense about how the bullet can lose? And there's no accounting for that. The ballistic solver doesn't know if you have a launch dynamic or how bad it is. It just assumes the bullet's flying clean. But if in fact it's not, that's how you could have accurate muzzle velocity readings and true to a different muzzle velocity based on where your shots are hitting on the target, and the BC not be incorrect.
And as an old rifle coach with a gray beard, I would say that I have seen guys talk themselves and shoot themselves right out of a good solution by truing on a target. And if you're shooting a 0.3 mil group size on a target or more, right? I mean, really good rifles at, some of these calibers, you're shooting a 6mm, a Dasher or a 6 Creedmoor or something. That bullet, in order to true it at like Mach 1.3, which is about where you're supposed to do it, you're looking at maybe 1,000 yards of distance to get to that velocity range. And at 1,000 yards of distance, what kind of group is your rifle holding? So now, if your rifle isn't capable of holding less than a minute at that range, you're really not truing. You see a shot here and a shot here, and you get the middle, and you're like, oh, that's my number. But if you shot another 20, 30, or 40 shots, you're going to have a large dispersion out there. So it's a really tricky thing to do. I've seen it happen innumerable times where guys will, out of 7 shots, they'll hit the center of the target and like, oh yeah, that's my number, and they've just skewed their data completely. So just be really careful. I mean, from the, I've seen it all on the range with guys kind of screwing up their own data. Trust the number. If you have to, goose the velocity to get it to line up. And there's techniques too, I'm sure, that I think Bryan has in his books about if you don't have a BC number at all, you can still you can backwards do the process to figure out what your muzzle velocity is or what your BC should be just by adjusting different inputs to try to get your trajectory to line up on the target. And that's kind of what Bryan, I think, was hinting at before is, getting those inputs by actual real world bullet strike is probably the best way. It's not very practical because you want to hit the target with the first freaking shot. But if you're just there in a purely exploratory scientific mission, that's probably the truest input, But yeah, don't get outsmarted by your device and check your inputs.
Mine's always been right. If I miss, it's because of wind. I mean, usually the elevation is not my issue. It's usually, I'm missing because of wind or something else. So it still amazes me to this day, like the 6 GT. I told you I just changed over to that caliber, and I went out and I was like, I shot that cartridge 100 yards, and then I went to a match because I have nowhere to go out and test. And so I went to K&M, and on the train up day, I went out there and I was like, I need to really make sure that it's hitting where the Kestrel says it should, and so I went and, dial, shoot, impact. Okay. Next distance, dialed it, shot, impact. I was like, this is to me, it's always still so crazy that it just is like, without fail, it is accurate. And it amazes me. It blows my mind. So
that's where science gets you. That's the expected. It is. I even still get sort of a giddy feeling when I see, like, I just returned from the Night Force Steel Challenge, the ELR Steel Challenge, and field shooting like that, PRS style shooting like that has not been something. I've only done one other local match, but to see 200 guys running around calculating fire solutions for each of like 80 targets in 2 days, 80 different fire solutions by 200 people, and they're all on. I mean, they're all on target. Like you said, if they're missing, it's because of wind. And I know how it works, but to be at a match like that and to actually see it working for everybody, that's where science can get you. Like you said, you do your work at 100 yards. That's all of the technical, that's all the distance you need to get your technical stuff right. You get your load shooting good groups with low standard deviations and, good, safe, reliable load, and zero, get a reliable zero at 100 yards, understand how your sight moves, do your tall target test. You get all of those calibration things done at short range, and then you go to long range, and the expected result is that you can propagate a fire solution to any target that is gonna be accurate, and at the end of the day, it's the contest isn't about who shows up with the most accurate fire solutions. That's a given. That's the baseline for everybody. The contest is who is able to employ the fundamentals of marksmanship the best that day and all those positions on all those targets, and who calls the wind the best. That's really what I came away from that field shooting competition with, is, it's a shooting contest. It's not a calculator contest. And so everybody has that as a given baseline that works for them. So, and that's, I enjoyed seeing it that much from that perspective. I've always felt like, to make an analogy, like, to racing, like a mechanic on the pit crew is what I have felt like. But this match, I felt like a driver in this match. I was one of the guys. I don't think I ever calculated, applied, and shot at that many targets in 2 days before, long range targets. That's, I shot F class all those years of competition. You have like 3 distances that you shoot in a day, and that's it. So there, it has its attractions, but dynamic target engagement wasn't one of them. So I really enjoyed it.
It's very cool. Now, if I could just understand light refraction. It's so odd sometimes whenever, like, we were at a match in February,
Freaking front line.
and I think that range, like, has voodoo going on. Like, everyone was having to add, like, 0.2 to their dope. Like, everyone
it was
was. It was some
0.3.
sort, or maybe it was 0.3.
Yeah, because
Some sort of light refraction or something at that point. And then in the afternoon, it wasn't like that. It was so odd, like, but it wasn't like one person was having an issue. It was everyone. So it was, and everybody had the rangefinders out. Everybody was ranging it to make sure. And then after the light changed, then everybody's dope was back on. And it was so weird. I still don't understand that.
Let me ask you, is the ground up close to the line of sight for most of the way to the target, or is there a big bowl? You know what I'm saying? Like, how far below your line of sight is the ground? Is it pretty close? Are you pretty close to the ground most of the way?
So based off of the entirety of the United States, the ground was pretty close to the line of sight of the target. Also, it was snowing. Also, it was cold. Also, it was wet. Also, it was miserable.
Did you have Mirage?
Not much, because usually, I'll think, oh, Mirage is doing it, but there really was not nearly like what I've seen before. It was the weirdest thing, because at first, like, one or two people went and I thought they just don't have their stuff together. And then some other people went that are really good shooters, and they were having the exact same issue. Like, we were just watching everybody. I can't remember if everybody was high or low. It was in February, but it was the craziest thing. I was like, I wish I could understand this light refraction and how it does this at different times to the target. It was weird.
That was so weird, because it was definitely something like light based, because I was asking Corey, shooting a 308 right in front of me, like, hey, what did you add to your dope? And with my 6.5, it was dead on every time. He's like, I had a 0.3 to impact, and just ding 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 every time, worked perfect.
It was weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some of those light-based effects that's, they're hard to quantify for somebody like me. I mean, a lot of that stuff is just like anything. If you're shooting and you have an observational kind of effect, you have to, as a shooter, you have to be able to, like, take that data, synthesize it, and apply it immediately. Like, don't say, hey, man, no, man, my Kestrel says this, but I'm hitting that. You have to change something. You have to add that data to the Kestrel or to your solution to overcome whatever it is out there. It's a real effect if your point of impact is different than what you think it is. An example of that was King of 2 Mile, I think in 2017. We were consistently shooting. We shot up on the hill. The targets past 3,000 yards are all at a fairly high elevation up on this cliff face. I think it's about like 8 or 9 degrees of inclination. Not a lot of inclination because it's so far away, but they were fairly high, and at least a couple hundred feet up this cliff. And we had a tailwind, and during the match, while you're shooting, you don't have time to do the whole deep dive analysis thing. You're like, shit, we're like 2/10 high everywhere. So the next time Bryan goes to shoot, we're taking 2/10 off it or whatever. You have to make those adjustments. And then what we found out I kind of reasoned out after the fact, was that we had this tailwind and there was a slight slope. And if you just figured out like the angle of that slope, there was a slight upward vector of air along the way. And it could easily have accounted for that, 0.1 or 0.2 difference all the way out there. At Camp Perry, I mean, even back in the 50s, my dad told me a story where they took a rifle and they put it in a mechanical rest at 1,000 yards in the morning and put it exactly on the center of the target. Then they went back at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and guess what? It was not pointing at the center of the bullseye anymore. It was like pointing like 18, 20 inches different. And that wasn't from thermal expansion. That was something optical, right? Something light-based. So I'm waiting for Bryan to do his next book and have a light chapter. Then we'll all know.
So we looked into that actually for the what was it, 2017 was the Worlds in Canada. So we were up there in 2016 and we were seeing weird stuff with the light like this. And we're like, we got to get this figured out before we come back next year to shoot the World Championships. So I got a spotting scope with a reticle in it and attached a GoPro camera, and would set it up and, you know, aim it on something. And like you said, just let it sit and wait under shade. And, you know, we saw some of these influences where the aim point would appear to move in relation to the reticle as the sun came and as the mirage actually came and went. The mirage is a refraction effect of the light going through various layers of air density. That's what causes the refraction effect, like a lens. And whenever, and that mirage is caused because the sun heats the ground and the ground heats the air. And now you've got layers of air starting with hottest at the bottom and colder as it goes up. But when the sun goes behind a cloud and you don't have that thermal effect hitting the surface right there, now the air temperature is pretty much the same. The mirage isn't as bad when a cloud comes over and the target kind of appears to clear up. Well, then as the sun, like on a day where you've got clouds passing, coming and going, and you're going from like shadow to bright light to shadow to bright light, we could watch the bullseye, the aim point, go up and down like systematically. When it got dark, target would clear. What did we say? We had the target clears up. So when it clears, it physically, like optically moves up. And, you know, you watch the video, you play it back kind of in time lapse, and you can just see every time it got dark, it would go up and be clear. And when the mirage was thick, it would go down and be, you know, miragey. It's kind of like once you see it and it's repeatable like that, you can see it in other places. Like if you look across the hood of a car that's being heated by the sun, and you look at something in the distance and kind of like move your head up and down a little bit, you can see the images in the distance as they approach, called the horizon of the heated surface. It kind of like gets sucked down to it, you know, like the mirage will pull that image down to make it look lower than it appears, make it appear lower than it is. Same thing with the sun setting on the ocean. It kind of looks like it gets flat. Well, there might be a different effect going on there, but you can definitely see these examples of optical distortions across heated surfaces where there's mirage.
So sun's up, guns up.
Well, I mean, the old saying was always, light up, sights up, So and I've seen the same thing over the decades of shooting competitively. I know now that if I'm shooting in the prone and I see that it gets completely overcast and the target gets really clear, I need to come down on my sight. Otherwise, I will shoot one out the top every single time. And that's not even with, and this is with an quote iron sights. That's with a front aperture and a rear aperture. So that's not even with a telescopic sight. And you still get that effect. It's just something that happens. So, so your thing could have been something like that. If the wind was blowing, you could be some wind at some sort of a vector that caused slight lift, not out of, if it's across the board, the same correction for everybody, that does to me suggest that it was optical, that it's shifting an image, type of thing. So
it was crazy. We got a bunch of live. Greg, hit those real quick.
All right, so we're going to go ahead with our every Tuesday afternoon. Jennifer, get ready to say it. Let's say it together. Ready?
Hey, Prentice.
Hey, Prentice.
Love you, mean it.
He listen. Prentice said that he's moving is his excuse for coming in an hour and a half late to our show. That is not a valid excuse.
Okay, maybe not. Next person.
All right. Next person. So Sam Phelps. He wants to know y'all's thought on spin drift. He's been told to turn it off in his kestrel. He shoots PRS maybe out to 1,400 yards in a match. Should he leave it on or off?
Well, that calculation is accurate, it's valid, and it's a real effect. Now, having said that, there may be reasons to turn it off so that you don't conflate that with your wind call, depending on how your what your strategy is for wind reading. But I mean, if you don't account for it, eventually you're going to miss targets at a long enough range. If your wind calls are truly accurate and you neglect spin drift, you're going to miss targets. I mean, it's a real thing.
Yeah, my take and approach on it is you have to manage it some way. So depending, rifles that have like a SG, like a 1.5 or 1.6, usually, like talking in mils, usually your spin out to about, in a lot of the bullets that we shoot, the spin out to about 1,000 yards is about 0.2 mils. That's about what it ends up from about 100 meters. So you can do this a couple of ways. You can remember that there's always 0.2 mils of extra left to right wind if you're shooting a right twist barrel out there that you have to count for. You can dial it and leave it alone. So if you know that, hey, I'm shooting out to say 1400 and my spin is, let's say it's like 0.35 or 0.4 mils. For me, I might dial half of it out, or I might dial it out completely. And just leave it on the gun and understand that I might be slightly right-handed all the way out to where I get convergence, kind of like a fighter pilot. Or you can just enter everything in the Kestrel. And lots of people hit a lot of targets that way. They just put the whole solution in the Kestrel. This is the direction I'm shooting. This is the wind direction. This is the wind speed. And you just read whatever numbers on the Kestrel. You just have to remember what's on there. I find that guys that use a lot of, if you're using wind dots or time of flight dots, like a Tremor 3 reticle, or if you're using kind of a quick wind or short wind formula, I find it's beneficial for me to kind of know what the spin drift is. And maybe that's the one thing I'll write down. So like on my little wrist pad thing or on the rifle, I might just write down my spin at the different targets, at the different ranges, at like kind of major waypoints. So when is it 0.1? When is it 0.2? When is it 0.3? And just have those numbers on there. And then for me to understand what the wind is doing, I might have my Kestrel or my Garmin, whatever my solver is, set up to give me zero spin drift, no spin drift. So I know what the pure wind number is. You can get fancy and leave spin drift on and have like your wind 1 be 0 miles per hour and your wind 2 be whatever you want it to be, and understand that you may have to add or subtract your spin from your wind number. That works too. It's a little more complicated. But I think if you're not going to touch it, you just have to understand, first of all, you have to know what the wind is doing at the target. That's a thing that I preach all the time. So, where I was shooting last week in Idaho, we were shooting at a target 900 meters. Guys were shooting a 6.5, and they were like, okay, 900 meters, what's 1 mile per hour of wind with this gun? Well, it's about 0.1 mils per mile an hour. I'm like, all right, you have 2 extra miles an hour of left. You have 2 miles an hour left wind out there just starting out. So you have 4 miles an hour right wind. How much wind is out there? Well, you really only have 2 miles an hour of right wind because you have 2 miles an hour of left wind pushing into it. So you can either remember it like that, dial it to neutralize it, and just understand where you're going to be on the target, or put everything in the Kestrel. So those are my 3 sort of recommendations on or sort of courses of action on how to mitigate spin and kind of keep what it is.
At what distance does it start to affect?
Well, how big your target is. So if your target's only 0.2 mils wide, right? So like standard IPSC, at 1,000 is like 0.45 mils wide, I think, something like that, right? 1,000 yards, 1 mil equals 1 yard, right? And standard IPSC is about 18 inches wide. So 18 inches is half a yard. So at 1,000 yards, a standard IPSC is 0.5 mils wide, right? Everybody follow me? So if my target's 0.5 mils wide and my spin is 0.3, if I don't do anything and I hold at the middle of the target, perfect wind call, I'm going to be 0.3 from the center. I'm going to miss that target. So a lot of this has to do with the sort of tactical and strategic decisions you make. If I'm shooting a 500-yard target and it's a standard IPSC and I'm shooting a 6 Creedmoor, I don't have to read the wind if it's blowing less than 10 miles an hour. I'm just going to hold on the edge. I'm going to hit every single target, right? So at those close ranges, I wouldn't worry about it until it probably gets beyond about 0.2 to kind of directly answer your question, to be honest. And an ELR, that's where we really see you got to dig in. I mean, if you're shooting 3,000 yards, 3,200 yards, 2 miles, right? That spin might be enough. That spin is probably at least the width of the freaking target. So if you don't do anything about it, you don't have a chance of hitting that target.
Yeah, a couple more comments on spin. One is, if you're an individual, you have all these different strategies to choose from. If you're on a team, it's important that everyone on your team is managing spin drift the same way, because otherwise you can't really communicate wind values to each other, you know, or it's a conversation every time. Like you come off the stage, yeah, man, I use 6 miles an hour. Okay, well, is that with spin baked in or not? So just have a consistent plan of how you're managing spin drift with your team. The other comment is, you know, bring it back to the question, you know, should I turn it off? I'm not sure if it's implied about, like, is it a real effect? Or so the way that we measured spin drift in order to be able to model it was having 2 guns set up to shoot the same ammo, same identical barrels, with the exception that one is left twist and one is right twist. And we zero these guns together to the same point of impact above the line of sight at 100 yards. So at the top of a tall target, we put our 1,000-yard elevation on, aim at the bottom, and we get both guns synchronized shooting into the same hole. And then we take those, like, from that position, move our aim point out to a 1,000-yard target and shoot again at the same aim point at 1,000 yards. And the left twist bullets, the bullets from the left twist barrel show up in one group, and the bullets from the right twist barrel show up to the right of that in another group. So it's definitely a real thing, and it's difficult to see it directly, especially if you're shooting in a wind condition, because the wind is so much overpowers it most of the time that, like, if you hit to the right, well, you're not sure how much of that is spin drift and how much of that is you missed your wind call. But whenever you do the test that I described, where you're shooting them at the same time out of 2 different twist barrels, in that case, even if there's wind blowing, it blows them the same amount, right? Like, we're shooting on a count, 3, 2, 1, shoot. So both bullets in the air at the same time, and they go, you know, the group spreads apart. And so it is a measurable effect. And those results of those live fire testing is what drives the prediction in the solver.
That's genius.
Believe the science. Yeah, I mean, look, when I was coming up and shooting, I kind of poo-pooed it as well until I really understood the effect. It's an easy thing, like, yeah, right. Because, I mean, you know, a lot of times, hey, my wind zero isn't changing. At least I can't notice it changing from distance to distance to distance. So all this spin drift stuff is bullshit. You know, that's like for the movie Sniper. I'm sandpapering my finger, you know, to mate it to the trigger. It's like, but if once you actually see it, it's true. It is a real effect. It is a real effect. So don't believe somebody that tells you it doesn't exist.
Awesome.
They're wrong. They're wrong.
So I got a few more live. When we were talking about the light and the stages and the refraction and everything, Lou said this is the exact reason why we need the advanced ballistics team shooting more PRS and NRL field matches, so that you guys can kind of see what we do a little bit. Also, he wants to know, when is the advanced ballistic software going to include input for slope?
Like inclination, like line of sight to target, it has that.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I know I have an iPhone, which is a superior phone system to the one that Bryan uses.
It is indeed. I agree.
It truly is.
You're losing credibility.
But I mean, on my applied ballistics solver on my phone, I could actually point it at the target and press the look angle button, and it gives you a countdown. So you kind of line it up like a sight on the target, and then you look back down at the phone. It gives you the angle. So I know that the
Wait, how
AD
you do
one
that with an
already does
iPhone?
I'm about to say, what do I?
I don't work for
how,
AD.
How do I? What do I?
I think it's a good product. Otherwise, I wouldn't be friends with Bryan.
It's definitely a good product, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, hit me up after this. I'll kind of walk you through it, but it's right there. Once you put your thing in there and you get to the page where it's actually talking about the engagement, yeah,
Yeah.
you can either enter the look angle in, you can actually physically enter the look angle in. So like
Oh,
on
wow.
this one, there's
That's cool.
I don't know if you can
Yeah.
see, you probably can't, but
Whoa.
it says
Nope.
yeah, right under distance, right under distance is look angle. So you can either hand enter it if you have another way of if you're using a laser rangefinder that gives you the look angle,
Yeah, it's
or you
called
can
different
use
things. Like if he's looking for slope, I don't think it's called slope anywhere. It's called look angle in the phone app, and the Kestrel, I think it's called INC for inclination. Or you could put the cosine in. There's, you can put the cosine because there's cosine indicators that they read in like 0.98, 0.9. So you could put the cosine in too. So it might just be that it's called something different than slope, but it is part of every ballistic solver.
That's cool.
Speaking of ballistic solver, Jen, not our Jen, wants to know which Kestrel model would be the best for F class.
They'll all work for that. Shooting F class, that application to 1,000 yards, you're in supersonic. There's it's not as demanding a requirement for a ballistic solver as like shooting ELR where you're into transonic and everything. The Elite, the Kestrel Elite is a great tool for F class for all kinds of shooting. I think that's a good one.
yeah. I mean I think I use the 57. I use the Elite in like regular NRA shooting, and I'm not using it to compute my trajectory. I kind of know what my zero is because I'm at the same range, same distance each time. But what I use it for are the different wind effects. Um, so and I use the Kestrel to Kestrels have a magnet have a they're magnetic. So a Kestrel is also a compass. So if your compass is calibrated in your Kestrel, you can actually tell the Kestrel which direction you're shooting, and then show the Kestrel which way the wind is blowing. The Kestrel is measuring the velocity and determining the angle relative to your line of fire, and the Kestrel can give you a pretty accurate wind call based, and you can kind of use it to war game. Hey, if the wind is from this direction, what's my correction? If it's from this direction. So that's what I use the Kestrel a lot in sort of the NRA long range stuff. And I will say, I went to England to shoot the British National Championships. I brought my Kestrel over there, and all those British guys were making fun of me. I went to England with 100-yard zero in Washington from Washington State, and I didn't shoot any of the sight and stuff at all. And every one of my first shots was within 6 inches from the center. And that was just letting the Kestrel do its thing atmospherically. So it's great. It's great if you're going to a new range.
I love mine.
I need one so bad. So 2 questions that kind of popped up about the advanced ballistics radar. Paul Phelps wants to know what's the longest distance the radar will pick up bullets, and then Sam Phelps was saying something about that your mobile laboratory was going to be at the Wisconsin Barrel Makers Classic. So where all is this mobile laboratory coming to here soon?
It's going to be it will be at the Wisconsin Barrel Makers match. It'll also be before that. It's going to be in Ohio this coming weekend. There's an event in Ohio. I'm not traveling to that one. I don't know the event. If we don't have a schedule up on our website, we really should, of where that lab is going to be. So check the website, the Applied Ballistics website, to see if we've got that schedule up yet. Things were up in the air for a long time. I mean, venues that we were scheduled for got canceled. So it was just kind of, we were waiting to see where all the chips were going to fall. But I think we've got a beat on several venues for it now. We were going to take it to the Night Force match in Wyoming, but they changed the venue and we couldn't get to it. We're going to make they're going to make accommodations for us to bring it there next year, though. So we'll have it out there. To answer the question about how far it tracks, it really depends a lot on the size of the bullet, in particular the base area of the bullet. So 22 bullets are the hardest because they're smallest, especially if they have a boat tail. Like a boat tail bullet is harder to track than a flat base bullet if they're the same caliber. So the 22 boat tail bullet is about the hardest, and we can track them reliably to about 800 yards. Now, another thing it depends on, in addition to the size of the bullet base, is what is in the background. So radars work a lot with noisy signals, right? They're processing a signal to noise ratio, and if there is ground in the background, then the signal to noise ratio, it's harder to get a good signal out. But if the trajectory is through the open sky, like if you're shooting over the horizon, then the radar can track the bullet with a blue sky background much further than it can if there's ground in the background of the track. So in that, I would say that adds hundreds of yards to the range that you can track a bullet. Now that's a 22 to 800, but it can do 30 cal to about 1500. We've done 375 cal to 2000 yards. And so you can see how much that's more than a doubling of range going from 22 to 375 caliber. So there's a lot of variables. It's not like it tracks all bullets to one range and that's it. It's a stochastic measurement. So there's a lot of signal processing that goes into it, which means it depends on a lot of things, how far it can track. But as a general rule of thumb, I would say 800 yards for 22, 1,000 to 1,500 for most middle caliber stuff. And then as far as 2,000 for some of the larger calibers.
That's awesome. Other than where you're going to be with the at Wisconsin and all that, do you have any upcoming matches that you're shooting, both of you? Any events that are coming up?
The next one I'm going to be at is, I don't even know when. It's the match at the Ring Neck Ranch. I haven't looked. Everyone's just told me it's going to be a great match and that I should go, so I signed up, but I don't.
Those
don't
are
know
the best.
details yet.
Those are the best when you don't know till like the day before.
What state is this in again?
And for me, I don't really have anything on my short-term calendar. All of these matches that I normally shoot in have been kind of postponed and canceled. I will probably be at the PRS Expo again this year.
I will.
I definitely recommend people go to that if they're trying to learn. There's a lot packed into that.
Mm-hmm. I've been to it every year since I started shooting a whopping 2 years ago. Well,
I mean, it's not just it's not just me running my mouth. There's, super smart guys that are like Troy Lawton from the Army Marksmanship Unit. He gives a class on reloading that, like, if you're like a new reloader, even an experienced guy, like, that's a guy that reloads tens of thousands of ammunition every year for guys that win national world championships at the Marksmanship Unit. And if you want the shortcut on how to do that stuff, Troy's like one of the smartest guys out there, 100%. So there's lots of great content down there for sure. But yeah, and again, I'll repeat my thing. I'm the only Emil Praslick on Facebook on freaking planet Earth, I'm pretty sure. So if you guys hit me up, I'm happy to. I'm about at my friend limit, I think. But if somebody has a question, shoot me a message. I'm happy to answer any question or help you guys out if I can.
He's very, very helpful.
Yes, he is.
Greg, what's the last one you got?
So, Brian, we talked a lot about your books, and like, I'm one of those guys that like, I'll decide I want to buy something, and like a year later, I'll actually buy it. Which one of your books should I buy first?
It depends on where you're at, like, and what you're, I would say probably in most cases, it's probably the first one, the Applied Ballistics for Long Range Shooting. That kind of gives the elements of ballistics. It doesn't go into very many specific like, here's how you load good ammo, or here's how. It's not necessarily a how-to book, but reading that book will give you a foundational knowledge of ballistics. You'll understand how spin drift happens, why it happens. You'll understand the Coriolis effect. You'll understand aerodynamic drag, how BCs are measured, how they're defined, and you'll get a good baseline. The other books, the modern advancements books, accuracy and precision, those are more like where we've published specific studies. Like the modern advancements books is kind of like a journal of what we have going on at the lab, different studies, tests on, pointing bullets and trimming bullets and rimfire tests, just a lot of practical experiments that we did and published results on. And then accuracy and precision covers like weapon employment zone hit percentage stuff. So like ballistics traditionally gives you, everything that you get from it is two numbers, a windage and an elevation sight correction. It all boils down to that. This is the windage and elevation you need to hit a target, and that's what ballistics provides. Well, there's other contextual information that you can get through ballistics, like the percentage of chance that you're going to hit a target of a given size in a certain distance with your uncertainty environment. And that's what that book goes into, is like, what affects your hit percentage more on a target? Is it your standard deviation, your muzzle velocity, or is it your group size going from 1 MOA to half MOA? Like, you can explore a lot of those questions and find out what really matters, what matters the most, and what doesn't matter very much. So that's kind of the overview of what's in those books. So maybe that'll help everyone decide what's best for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So everybody go buy those books because they have a lot of knowledge in them. A lot. So definitely it's on my list. Like I said, I tried to tackle someone, but he was bigger than me, so I thought it wasn't smart.
You went scrapping at the prize table.
And I don't fight over much on the prize table, but I was like,
there's been two
really
things I've seen you go ham for.
What was the other thing?
Your press.
Oh, yeah, the finale. I didn't have a press. And I needed a press, and there was a press on the prize table, and I was like, no, I want that. Anyway, I got a press. It was great. So I think that we can wind this one down. We've talked for almost 2 hours. I appreciate y'all staying. I know this was really long. We had a lot of questions. A lot of people wanted to know. So we'll wind it down to shout outs. Greg, you can start.
Hey, look, I'm not even muted. All right. So my shout outs, GSL suppressors up here. I got to take my can and put on my 22 rifle for the first time over the weekend at my NRL 22 match. It was absolutely awesome. Zero sound.
While we're talking about GSL, Kevin messaged me and said that he has an announcement that this Saturday, June 20th, GSL suppressors will be giving away a free suppressor and hosting a range demo day in the North Augusta or Edgefield, South Carolina area. So if you're near where I live and Greg lives, you can hit us up for that. There's a registration link. So if it's something that you're local and you want to go to, you need to message either me or Greg and we can get you the information. Okay, carry on. Sorry.
Yes, that also. So my GSL suppressors are currently sitting at Crack Shot Pawn and Firearms out in Thompson. If you're anywhere close to us and need somebody to order you an amazing GSL suppressor, hit them up. Shooters and Sharpshooters of Augusta are local indoor and outdoor ranges where you're able to prepare for a match, get your 100-yard zero, and then show up at a match out to 1,200 yards. They're here. They're open. They have ammo, all sorts of good stuff. PDC Custom, if you want an absolutely beautiful rifle chassis, available in lime green in both center fire or rim fire. They got you. They also have normal human colors if you don't want to be weird like me. Please don't be weird like me. I painted that color so that I can find it in a match because I lose literally everything. ADZ Performance, if you want to build a really sweet Gucci Glock, they have everything you need at a great price. Phone Scope, the best training / looking cool for the gram item pretty much in the world. Shooter's World Propellant, they make an amazing powder. They have no powder shortages. They're still fully stocked, so if you need anything, they're available on pretty much most of the websites out there. Hunter's HD Gold, just an absolutely amazing pair of glasses that lets you see. It's kind of like one of those little HDR filters for your phone, except for it works for your eyes. Vortec, if you forget to clean your rifle before the match, clean it the night before in the Airbnb, you'll shoot awesome the next day after you shoot about 20 rounds.
All right. Emil, do you have any shout outs you want to give? You're muted.
Just to remind people that they can go to all of our products at capstonepg.com. That's the website for Capstone Precision Group. And from there, they can navigate. They can see the Burger products, Lapo products, Vitavori products, SK Rimfire. You can also find links to scheduling a test session at one of the two Rimfire test centers on that website. All that stuff. And always check into our Burger website. Go to the blog where we have press releases. We have content about what Bryan's doing. And then again, the nobsbc.com, the link to all those articles. And Bryan Wink asked me to give him a shout out. So that's shout out is for you, Bryan. So I'm good.
All right. And Bryan, you got any shout outs?
Since I just got back from it, want to shout out to Scott Satterley in Wyoming and his crew for the awesome match that they put on out there. It was really challenging and it took an incredible amount of work. Just the amount of work it took me to shoot the match, to walk around to all those stages, but somebody set all that steel up. You know, there's 2 moving target stages. I think he said there was over 7,000 pounds of steel that they set up all together for that match. So it was a great time, very well run. I very much appreciated the opportunity to shoot in that match and looking forward to going back next year.
Awesome. And shout outs for me, I'll just run through real quick. McMillan Stocks, Night Force Optics, GSL Suppressors, Prime Ammunition, HD Gold, Shooters of Augusta and Sharpshooters of Augusta, and Vortec. I think that's about it. Warren Scope Mounts. Close enough. Everybody will forgive me because I'm at the beach and I don't have my stuff in front of me. So anyway, and I just want to really thank y'all again for coming out. Check out Burger, Bullets, Capstone, all of the stuff that they have. But like for precision rifle, Burger bullets are really amazing. I've shot them the last 2 years. And so I'm not just saying that. I shoot them and I wait for them to come in stock and order those. So because I really like them. So check them out. Go to their website and check them out. You can get them pretty much everywhere. So thanks very much for being with us for our 300th episode. This was awesome. I'm going to have to listen to this show again because there was so much knowledge. I'll never remember it all. So I'm glad it's saved. All right. And that'll be it. So thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.